Hey folks, I'm Jack Fossett, and welcome to this demo and review of this very special hand-wired Tweed 57.5E3. This amp does amazing things. It's kind of more like 3 amps, well, 3 times, carry the 5 in it. This amp does a lot of things. I'll tell you more about it. First, let's hear some tones, then we're going to get into what it is and what it does. So this is a Franklyn Amps 57.5E3, and it's a combo head? Head combo? KED? HOMBO? I think I like HOMBO best. We'll go with HOMBO. Now the reason that I say that, so this looks like an amp head, and it is an amp head. Now have you ever seen those kind of funny pictures where you had a tech who clearly doesn't know what they're doing, where they put an SM57 like in front of a Marshall head, not in front of the speakers? Well, the thing about this one is this is designed to work primarily as an amp head. However, there's actually a little tiny 8-inch speaker in there. There's an 8-inch Jensen speaker in here, and it can run just off of that. So there's a number of really cool things that does. We'll talk about that in a minute. Now, circuit-wise, this is a 5E3. Now, the Fender 5E3, the Fender Deluxe 5E3 narrow panel, was a very, very famous guitar amp in the Tweed line. They had a number of different iterations. You know, the Deluxe there were Deluxe other circuits beforehand that were similar, but the really famous one is the narrow panel 5E3, which is what this is based off of. Now, the 5E3 it really only needs one point on its resume, which is it's the amplifier from Hotel California. Pretty much the greatest guitar song and greatest guitar solo and one of the greatest guitar tones of all time was half a Les Paul and half a Telecaster plugged into a 5E3 and just let it rip. Don Felder in particular was known for using the 5E3 in the studio. Now, the old ones would have had they would have been combos, and they would have had a 12-inch speaker. Fender used various different 12-inch speakers and 10-inch speakers. Now, this one being an amp head, of course, one of the really cool things is you can plug it into different speaker configurations, and I'm going to be doing this in this demo of this amp. I'm going to plug into this one underneath. This is a Eminence loaded 210 speaker cabinet. Now, classic Fender amps are, certainly more often than not synonymous with 10-inch speakers, and I love the sound of 10-inch speakers with this type of circuit. So we are going to do some in the 10-inch with the 10-inch speakers. It has an Eminence, George Alessandro, and an RF10. And then I'm also going to plug into a Marshall 212. Now that one is loaded with a Celestion Alnico Cream on the bottom and an Eminence private jack on the top. We're going to do each of those configurations, and then also I am going to show you how it sounds not plugged into a speaker cabinet, just with its little internal 8-inch speaker. Now what's really, really cool about that is you can kind of get these like little champ tones. You know, the original line of those Fender Tweed amps, they made the classic 57 champ. Now that was responsible for things like Layla, as well as a number of other records and things. And they were popular because they were lower wattage with a smaller speaker. You could really crank them up in the studio to get that saturated tone. And it sounded big, but you could tell it was a small amp. It's kind of like, you know, this would have been Supro, but kind of like early Led Zeppelin recordings they got from smaller amps that were turned all the way up. Well, this one, even though it's higher in watts, because it has that 8-inch speaker, that tiny little speaker really compresses and focuses the signal. So you can get really amazing, you know, if you were to put it next to a champ, which Franklyn Amps also makes a champ, so check that out. If you were to put it next to a champ, you'd go, okay, yeah, there's a little, you know, there's a difference. However, it's more than passable, and it gives you just another sort of utility use for this amplifier. It's loud. It's loud enough to gig with, but it's not unbearably loud. I'm, you know, been turning it all the way up and sitting with it right here and playing it for you, and you know, my ears certainly aren't bleeding, but it's definitely loud enough to carry, particularly depending on what kind of speakers you're going to plug into. You know, if you want to plug into a bigger, you can plug it into a 412, and especially depending on what speakers in there, how focused are they. You know, this is definitely a gig worthy amp, but also just like kind of like a Swiss Army knife in the studio. Okay, so now you're probably asking yourself, okay, so it can do different speaker configurations. Okay, so why did I say it was more amps in one? Because, you know, of course, amp heads you can plug into whatever speaker cabinets you want. Well, what's especially cool about this amp is it has a 3-way switch right in the back here, which I'm going to share a clip of. And that 3-way switch is a negative feedback switch. So it has the stock 5E3 setting. It has another setting where it turns off the negative feedback. And then it has a JTM style negative feedback. So you have 3 different, essentially for layman's terms, for those of you that don't know what that really means, like me, because I don't know what that really means. I'm not technically inclined. I just play what sounds good. It gives you 3 different flavors of gain character, from a much cleaner classic sound all the way to just a really, really amazing saturated classic rock sound. And remember that the early Marshalls were based off of Fender Bassements, so there are major similarities in that circuit. And I think you'll hear, especially with this amp really, really cranking, it with that switch, which I'm going to go back and forth with that switch, you can just dial in an incredible range of tones with this amp. Now, for the top panel, what you have is you have 4 inputs. You have 2 inputs per channel. There's a normal channel and a bright channel. You have a volume for each channel, and then you have a master tone. There's a fuse on top. There's also your on-off switch, and of course, and there's a standby switch. Now, that gives you a whole range of other things that you can do, and I'm going to show you some of this too. One of the classic things to do with this type of amp, which is one of the ways to get the most out of it, is to jump the channels. And so what I'm doing for a lot of these clips is plugging directly into the normal channel, and then I'm using just a little patch cable to jump the bright channel to the normal channel. So I'm plugging that patch from the bright channel number 1 into the normal channel number 2. And then you have range of both of the volume knobs, and you can blend them to taste. And you know, you'll see a little bit there of kind of what it sounds like when you get them going together, what it sounds like when you get the normal channel turned up louder versus the bright channel turned up louder. The other thing you can do that I really, really like, and I'm going to show you a clip that has a Les Paul and a Stratocaster doing this, is to plug just directly into the number 2 input. Now the number 2 input is not just a second input, it's a lower gain input. The reason that I like that is because you get a little more sag to the tone, it's a little bit less output, but there is sort of a different, the notes don't kind of brashly jump out as much. I'm not saying this amp is brash, but I'm just comparatively. The notes don't jump out off the fretboard quite as quickly. There's a little more sag, you can sink into it a little bit more, and it doesn't get quite as gainy. So what's cool about that is you can get bigger cleans and sort of slightly more bluesy overdrives using that, where you're still getting the power tubes really warmed up and getting to their saturated point, but the tone coming out is not, I don't want to say too over the top because it doesn't get over the top, but you understand what I'm trying to say. It fattens up your cleans and it gives you a smoother, bluesier overdrive in case you want that instead of the heavier tube saturation that you would get from the number one input. Okay, so now, as I said, I'm not technically inclined. I am going to read off the specs of this amp for you, and I'm just going to read it because otherwise I'm going to start going off on things like, flux capacitors and stuff like that. Okay. A unique optimized 5E3 circuit build, retaining all the Tweed mojo, increased wattage and voltage values to increase longevity. Handwired, classic tone transformers, JJ5Y3 rectifier, JJ matched 6V6s, JJ12AX7 and 12AY7 tubes. Filter caps are F&T, while the tone caps are orange drop, and carbon comp metal film resistors. And then it also has the feedback mod built in, making it 3 amps in one. One setting being the stock 5E3, second turns feedback off, the third is a JTM style negative feedback, making it more pedal friendly and completely transforming the amp. The internal 8-inch speaker gets automatically switched off if you plug in an external speaker cabinet. It's an 8 ohm output, and it also has an additional speaker out. So you have a main speaker out and then an extension speaker out. So there's just a huge number of things that you can do with this amplifier. Now, as far as the build on this particular one goes, and there are other ones as well, he makes some out of custom tone woods and things, but this one, just to give you what this is that you're hearing today. It is void-free pine, which means no knots. The joints are full dovetail versus the original cabinets, which were box joints. The dovetails ensure that those cabs will never separate, so it's built sturdy. Baffle and backs are 1/2-inch birch plywood. Okay, and now, what's the most amazing thing out of all of this is the price. There's one currently listed that's as of January 2020 with a stained oak cabinet for $1,000. This one came in at $750. Those prices are subject to change, of course. It's a small company, and as exposure grows and as, hopefully orders increase and everything, I don't want to, don't get locked into what that price is. Prices could go up. You never know about availability of components. The reason that I mention it is even if the price goes up, this is an incredible amp, and what you get is ridiculous for that money. Okay, a brand new Fender Blues Junior is $600. $150 less than this. This is about 100 times the amp of a Fender Blues Junior. You get solid wood construction, again dovetail, hand-wired, top-level components. You have the negative feedback switch. This amp can do a ton of different things with a ton of different guitars. You're ordering from a smaller company. This one has a lacquered tweed. It looks fantastic. And one of the things that you really notice with amps like this, and this is my response to this amp in particular, first time I plugged in, I just used the little 8-inch speaker. When you get amps like this, they're hand-wired with good components, and they don't have all kinds of other gunk in them. They don't have, a billion different circuits and a billion different things. One of the things is it sounds very natural. I plugged a Stratocaster in when I first kind of got it unpacked and everything. I just plugged in a Stratocaster straight into the normal channel with the 8-inch speaker, and I just couldn't believe, it was kind of like, so this is what my Strat sounds like. This is amazing. The tone is, you can almost feel your fingerprints on the fretboard coming out of the amp. It's really, really great, and I think you'll hear that in some of the clips. I'm trying to do my best to kind of share with you that just pristine, open, clean. So you get an incredible representation of just a beautiful guitar tone that then also is going to take effects well if you want it, add a little reverb and you're just in sonic bliss kind of territory. Now, to show that off, what I'm doing for this demo is not only plugging into the different speaker configurations like we talked about, but I'm also going to use a bunch of different guitars. And I'll tell you about the guitars that I'm using in this video. This is a Gibson ES345, and with this one I'm going to be plugging into the 212 setup. This is an all-stock guitar. I'm also going to be playing a Gibson Les Paul loaded with Lust for Tone Skydogs, which are a Dwayne Allman inspired pickup. Now, that one's going to be great, of course. The kind of classic rock and Allman tones tones you'd be able to get out of this amp is just really perfect. So that one has 50 style wiring and the Dwayne Allman style pickups from Lust for Tone. The Stratocaster that I'm playing has Lust for Tone 57 Lustcaster pickups, which are just a great representation of an old Strat. And then I'm also playing a Lust for Tone loaded Fender Telecaster that has Outlaws in it, Lust for Tone Outlaw pickups. And again, I'm going to switch back and forth at various times through the feedback switch, and so you'll be able to hear really just what a dramatic difference that feedback switch makes to the character. I'm going to play around with the volume knobs, with the channels jumped, and just really try and give you a good representation of how many different things you can do with a relatively simple, straightforward circuit. Now I'm going to hold off from pedals for the most part from this demo. I do have a reverb plugged in, and that's just because I prefer to not play dry, but the reverb is not turned up. It's just a little bit of reverb just to add that kind of slightly airy tail, and even that is going to be dialed way, way back, particularly for some of the heavier overdriven tones when I really get the amp rocking. It does take pedals well, but for this demo I really just want to focus on the amp and what the amp does, because it's not one that I think really needs pedals. You can certainly use pedals and everything. I think that the fact that you have the 8-inch speaker in it makes it super portable, so you could use it as a easy to carry around practice amp, but then again, being able to plug into an external speaker just really opens up a whole different world of tones that you can do. For small gigs, especially if you have a microphone, if you're going to mic it, you could just bring this to a lot of gigs, stick a microphone right in the front, and get these beautiful clean tones. And driving this, and that really depends on what your gig situation is. There are going to be some places where you could really crank this amp and get those amazing natural overdriven tones live. There'll be other situations where you can't. It's kind of in a little bit of a gray area as far as clean headroom go. It's not, I wouldn't say it has enough clean headroom for a lot of gigs if you're unmiked, but then to really, really crank it, it might be a little too loud for some gigs. So there is kind of there's a sweet spot that it sits in, but that just all depends on your band, and it all depends on what kind of, clubs or venues that you're playing. So that's a question that I get a lot is it good for gigs? What is it, where's its clean headroom? It really just depends. And for instance, like if you're going to plug this into a higher wattage speaker cabinet and go off of the stock setting of the negative feedback switch, you'll have a lot of clean headroom and a really, really big tone. If you go to the JTM setting and you're just going straight out of the little speaker, you're not going to have nearly as much clean headroom, but you'll get some really cool saturation earlier. So it is loud enough to be usable. It's not so loud that it's not manageable. It just depends on your situation. If you want to ask questions in it about, hey, let me know what your band setting is. Hey, do you think it would be good enough? I'll do my best to answer. So let me know what you think of this amp. What do you think of the tones that you're hearing? Again, I'm really, really impressed. It kind of does everything from sweet bluesy break up to totally exploding amp, almost edge of fuzz territory, to more Marshall-ish style gain. And then if you're going to use a pedal board with this thing, there's just a billion things that you can do with it. I'm Jack Fossett. Let me know what you think in the comments. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Check out Franklyn amps. Let's hear some more tones, and have a great day.
Mm-hmm.